change everything. I told you. I told you to keep your mouth shut.
You stupid.
You broke your promise.
There is a very specific kind of silence that follows a not guilty verdict. It's not a peaceful one. It's a vacuum, sucking all the air out of the room before it's filled by the chaos of a life being given back. And cutting through that fragile silence, right now, is the sound of a boy's laugh. That's Julian Thorne, 17 years old. And in this moment, he is the smartest person in the world. He's just heard the words he knew he would hear. The case against him has collapsed. The system, he believes, is a game for children, and he has just won the championship. He leans over to his expensive lawyer, his voice a smug whisper you can just barely catch. I told you it was easy. But here's the thing about games. Sometimes the rules change just when you think you've won. The judge shuffles some papers. It's meant to be over. But then she looks up, her voice not loud, but low enough to slice through Julian's celebration like a razor. Mr. Thorne, she says, before you go, we need to discuss the security footage from your sister's doll. Before we begin, where are you listening to this right now? Is it late where you are, the rain tapping against your window like it's trying to get in? Or are you somewhere sunny, hoping this story provides a little shade? Wherever you are, get comfortable. But not too comfortable. And make sure you have subscribed. You're going to want a front row seat for this. This is the story of Julian Thorne. A boy who looked at the world, at all of us, and saw nothing but insects beneath his feet. He planned the perfect crime. He stood in a courtroom and laughed in the face of justice, certain he would walk out a free man. This is the story of how he was right about everything. Until he was devastatingly, catastrophically wrong. And it all started with the one person he never, ever thought to watch, his own little sister. Before the courtroom, before the laughter, there was the kingdom. And its name was Crestmere. I want you to picture it. Not a hair out of place. Lawns so green they look painted, stretching out like flawless emerald carpets. The streets are wide and quiet, swept clean every dawn. You can hear the hum of a central air unit, the distant thwack of a tennis ball from the country club. It smells of freshly cut grass, of money, and of something else, something subtle. Fear. The fear of being less than perfect. This is where Julian Thorne grew up. And in this world of pristine surfaces, he wasn't just a resident, he was its prince. His family's house was a monument of glass and steel, all sharp, clean angles. It wasn't a home that encouraged messy, human things like laughter or spilled drinks. Everything had its place. And Julian. Well, Julian saw himself as the masterpiece in the center of the gallery. He was 17. To everyone else, he was the golden boy. Captain of the debate team, because he loved the feeling of dismantling someone's argument piece by piece. Flawless grades, because anything less than an A was a stain. He had that kind of easy smile that made adults trust him and that made other kids wary. They couldn't quite pinpoint why he made them uncomfortable, but he did. It was in the eyes. The smile never quite reached them. They were always watching, calculating. His parents were pillars of this community. His father, a man who spoke in boardroom summaries and saw life as a series of profitable mergers. His mother, a woman whose life's work was maintaining a specific, tasteful image. They were proud of Julian, of course. But their love felt conditional, like a performance review. He had to be the best. And he was. And then, there was Chloe. Chloe was 9. A little wisp of a thing with messy braids and a collection of colorful band-aids on her knees. Where Julian was cool and composed, Chloe was all warm, chaotic energy. And she adored her big brother with every fiber of her being. To her, he wasn't calculating or cold. He was the one who could explain the stars, the one who would sometimes, on a rare whim, push her on the tire swing in their impossibly green backyard. She was the only person he never seemed to perform for. He didn't turn on the charming smile for her. With Chloe, he was just there. Sometimes distant, sometimes annoyed if she interrupted his reading, but he tolerated her. He saw her as his possession. His one single blind spot in a world he was otherwise certain he controlled completely. This was the ecosystem of the Thorne household. The successful, absent father, the image-obsessed mother, the brilliant, narcissistic son, and the little sister, buzzing around them all like a hummingbird, unaware she was living in a cage made of glass. It was in this perfect pressure cooker environment that a terrible idea began to form in Julian's mind. It started not as a rage or a hatred, but as a hypothesis. A question. Could he commit the perfect crime? Not because he had to, but simply because he could. Because in a world this soft, this predictable, he felt a need to test its boundaries. To prove once and for all that he was the smartest person in the room. In every room. And in a kingdom as pristine as Crestmere, all it takes is one prince who believes he's above the law to start a revolution. He just didn't know that the revolution would begin in his own house, with a little girl and her toy. So, how does a boy like that decide to kill? It's the question, isn't it? For most of us, the thought is a nightmare, a shadow that flits at the edge of our consciousness. For Julian, it was a logic puzzle. It was art. Let's step into his mind for a moment. A dangerous place, I know. But necessary. He didn't look at people the way you and I do. He saw them as objects, tools, or, in this case, as a canvas. He was the artist, and he needed the perfect surface upon which to paint his masterpiece of a crime. And that's where Maya Peters comes in. I want you to see her, just as Julian did. 16 years old. She didn't come from the same money as the Thorns. Her family lived in a smaller, older house on the edge of Crestmere, a house that actually looked lived in. There were slightly overgrown flower beds and a porch swing that creaked. Maya was an artist herself. She painted. Not the kind of safe, pretty landscapes that would win a ribbon at the country club fair. Her canvases were messy, vibrant, and a little dark. Splashes of color that looked like feeling itself. She listened to music you've probably never heard of on a pair of big, chunky headphones. She was, in every way that mattered, the absolute opposite of Crestmere's polished perfection. And that's exactly why Julian chose her. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a symbol. A symbol of everything that was unpredictable, emotional, and messy in his ordered world. And that made her the perfect subject for his experiment. If he could erase something so vibrant, so full of life, and get away with it, then his belief would be proven. He really was above it all. He didn't hate her. In his own twisted way, he found her beautiful. The way a mathematician finds a complex equation beautiful. It was a problem to be solved. Her spirit, her independence, the very things that made her who she was, that was what made her the ideal victim. Her death would be a shock wave. It would be noticed. It would create chaos. And Julian was certain he could stand in the center of that chaos, completely untouched. So, he began to plan. And this was where his brilliance truly shone. He wasn't just planning a murder. He was designing a narrative. He was writing a story where he was not the villain, but the innocent bystander. The grieving friend. He learned her routines. The way she took the long way home from school, cutting through the woods at the edge of town because she liked the quiet. The way she'd stop on the old stone bridge to watch the water. He noted it all, the way a director blocks a scene. He knew when she would be alone. He knew the exact spot, a secluded bend in the path, shrouded by ancient oak trees where the streetlights didn't reach. He would use the environment, you see. The darkness, the isolation. They were his accomplices before he even lifted a finger. He chose a night when there was a school event he was required to be at, a debate tournament. It provided him with a rock-solid alibi, a room full of witnesses who would see him being brilliantly persuasive. He would leave for just 20 minutes. A quick bathroom break, he'd say. 20 minutes was all he needed. Can you feel the coldness of that? The calculation. While other kids were worrying about their arguments or their dates for the spring formal, Julian was ticking down the seconds to a murder he had scheduled like a dentist appointment. He felt no fear. Only a sense of profound excitement. This was the ultimate test. This was his masterpiece. The canvas was chosen. The brushes were ready. All that was left was for the artist to make his first irreversible stroke. The night it happened, the Crestmere High School auditorium was buzzing. Not with panic, not with fear. just with the ordinary, boring buzz of a regional debate tournament. The air smelled like floor wax and teenage anxiety. You know the sound, the rustle of note cards, the nervous clearing of throats, the polite, forced applause. And there, in the center of it all, was Julian Thorne, the star. He was on stage, under the hot lights, and he was magnificent. I need you to understand this. This wasn't a boy sweating through a performance. This was a boy in his absolute element. His arguments were sharp, elegant. He used words like surgical instruments, precise and clean. When his opponent, a flustered girl from a rival school, made a weak point, he didn't just counter it. He dismantled it with a polite, almost pitying smile. "With all due respect," he'd say, and then he'd proceed to show the entire room why her argument was built on sand. The judges nodded, impressed. The audience watched, captivated. He was building a fortress of credibility, brick by solid brick, in front of everyone. And the entire time, a separate clock was ticking in his head. While his mouth was speaking about foreign policy or economic theory, his mind was elsewhere. It was in the woods, on the path. He was counting down. He knew Maya would be leaving her art club right about now. She'd be putting on her headphones, starting her walk through the trees in exactly 20 minutes. The duality of it is what chills me. The perfect performance layered over the perfect crime. He was the puppeteer, and everyone in that room, the judges, his teammates, his parents sitting proudly in the third row, they were all his puppets, dancing to a tune they couldn't even hear. Then came his moment. The debate round ended. The applause was genuine, warm. He gave a modest little bow. He had about a 40-minute break before the final round. He made a show of stretching, of looking a little tired. He walked up to his coach. "Incredible work, Julian," the coach beamed, clapping him on the shoulder. Julian gave a practiced, weary smile. "Thanks, coach. Mind if I run to the men's room? Maybe get a breath of fresh air? Need to clear my head for the final." "Of course. Take 5. You've earned it." And just like that, he was excused. He walked off the stage, through the back of the auditorium. He moved with purpose, but not with haste. No one looked twice. He was Julian Thorne. He was where he was supposed to be. He pushed through the heavy double doors at the back of the school. The night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the stuffy auditorium. He didn't look back. He walked to the student parking lot, got into his silent, expensive car, and pulled out onto the empty street. The drive to the edge of the woods took 4 minutes. He'd timed it half a dozen times before. He parked in a shadowy pull-off, a place no one would notice a car. He didn't run. He walked. His debate shoes, polished to a high shine, crunched on the gravel, then went silent as he stepped onto the soft earth of the path. He checked his watch. He was right on schedule. He had 15 minutes. 15 minutes to become a ghost, commit an act that would shatter a family, and return to his throne as debate champion. He stood there for a moment, in the dark, listening. The sounds of the school were gone. All he could hear was the wind in the leaves, and the distant, faint beat of music coming from up the path. Maya's headphones. He took a breath, not of fear, but of focus. The artist was about to begin his work. The alibi was set. The stage was empty. And the main actor was walking into the wings, completely unseen. We won't stand here in the dark with him. We don't need to see what his hands did in the shadows between the oak trees. Some things are worse when you only hear them. And so, let me tell you what the world heard that night. It heard the faint, tinny beat of music from a pair of headphones, suddenly cut off. A scuffle of feet on damp leaves. A single, sharp intake of breath, more surprise than fear, that was cut short. And then, the sound of breaking glass. It wasn't a window. It was the small, heart-shaped locket Maya always wore, a gift from her grandmother. The chain snapped, and the glass front of the locket shattered when it hit a stone on the path. That tiny, delicate sound. Tink. In that silent wood, it was as loud as a gunshot. And then, the true silence began. The kind of silence that is heavy. the kind that has weight and texture. It was the silence of a life ended, and of a killer standing perfectly still, listening. Julian didn't feel panic. His heart was beating, sure, but it was the steady, powerful rhythm of an athlete in competition. He had done it. The hypothesis was proven. He had crossed the ultimate line, and he was still standing. He was, in that moment, a god of the shadows. He was meticulous, efficient. He didn't look at her face. He saw a problem to be managed. He used the gloves he'd brought. He moved the body, not out of remorse, but out of strategy, hiding it in a thicket where he knew it wouldn't be found until morning. He checked the ground for anything he might have dropped. His eyes scanned the path, the moon his only witness. He saw the locket, the little broken heart, glinting in a sliver of moonlight. For a second, I wonder if he saw the irony. The broken heart on the path. A poet would have a field day. But Julian wasn't a poet. He was a scientist. He almost left it. A perfect red herring. But no, that was too messy. It was a clue, however small. So, he picked it up. The broken glass and the bent metal. He shoved it deep into his pocket. A souvenir he would dispose of later. He took one last look around. The scene was clean. Quiet. The only thing left was the silence he had created. Then, he turned and walked back the way he came. His steps were just as measured, just as calm as they were on his way in. The entire thing had taken 12 minutes. He was 3 minutes ahead of schedule. By the time he pushed open the auditorium door, the boy standing in the woods was gone. In his place was Julian Thorne, the debater, rubbing his eyes a little as if he'd just gotten some fresh air. His coach smiled at him. "Ready for the final round?" Julian smiled back. Ready. And the world, for a little while longer, had no idea that its axis had just shifted. That the silence in the woods was now slowly, inexorably, beginning to spread. The sun came up the next morning in Crestmere like it always did, spilling golden light over those perfect lawns. But the silence from the woods had seeped into the town. It started in one house. The Peters house. At first, it was just a minor irritation. A missed curfew. Mrs. Peters, Maya's mom, woke up and saw her daughter's bed hadn't been slept in. The comforter was still neatly tucked. That wasn't like Maya. She was responsible. She'd text if she was staying over at a friend's. A little knot of worry tightened in Mrs. Peters' stomach, but she pushed it down. Teenagers, she thought. Maybe her phone died. She made calls. To Maya's friends from art club. No, she left right after us. To her boyfriend. I haven't heard from her since yesterday. The knot pulled tighter. The quiet house began to feel too quiet. No music drifting from under Maya's door. No smell of her lavender shampoo in the bathroom. By 10 a.m., the irritation had become a cold, hard stone of fear in her chest. The phone calls were done. There was no one left to ask. She stood in the kitchen, her hand trembling as she picked up the phone to call the police. Her voice was thin, reedy when she spoke to the dispatcher. "My daughter, she didn't come home last night." That's how it begins. Not with a scream, but with a whisper. A single frightened phone call that sends the first crack shooting through the perfect porcelain world of Crestmere. A patrol car was sent to the Peters home. Then another. The news didn't explode. It seeped like a stain. A neighbor saw the cruisers and texted another neighbor. The post on the community Facebook group was cautious at first. Does anyone have any information about Maya Peters? Her family is worried. But the word missing has a certain gravity. It pulls everything toward it. By that afternoon, the buzz in Crestmere had completely changed. It wasn't about property values or the upcoming garden show. It was a low, anxious hum. People gathered in small clusters on their driveways, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the woods at the edge of town. The same woods their kids played in. The silence there wasn't peaceful anymore. It was threatening. And where was our prince, Julian Thorne, during all this? He was home. He ate a large breakfast. He did some homework. He watched the chaos unfold from his bedroom window like it was a mildly interesting nature documentary. He saw the Peters Street fill with cars, saw the grim faces of the police. He felt a thrill, deep and cold. This was the impact. This was the chaos he had created. He was the composer, and the entire town was playing his symphony of panic. His little sister, Chloe, came into his room, her small face pinched with worry. "Julian, is Maya okay?" "Mom said she's lost." Julian looked down at her. He didn't smile. He simply placed a calm, steady hand on her head. "I'm sure she's fine, Chloe. Sometimes people just get lost." And he believed it. He wasn't lying. In his mind, Maya wasn't dead in the woods. She was just lost. A variable he had successfully removed from his equation. The masterpiece was complete. The only thing left to do was to sit back and admire the reaction it provoked. But a masterpiece, once seen, can't be unseen. And the people looking at it now, they were starting to look for the artist. It doesn't take long for the investigation to land on the doorstep of the Golden Boy. When a girl goes missing, you talk to everyone. And you always talk to the last people who saw her. Which is how, 2 days after Maya vanished, Detective Eva Rostova came to sit in the Thorns' pristine living room with Julian. Now, picture Detective Rostova. She doesn't look like a TV cop. There's no dramatic trench coat. She's in a simple, comfortable blazer, and she looks tired. But it's a specific kind of tired, the kind that comes from seeing too much. Her eyes are the most notable thing. They don't dart around, they settle. They absorb. She doesn't miss a thing. Julian, for his part, was the picture of concerned civility. He offered her a drink. He sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap. He was ready. "Julian, thank you for your time," Rostova began, her voice calm and even. "This must be very upsetting." "It's just unbelievable," Julian said, shaking his head just enough to seem sincerely bewildered. "Maya? It doesn't make any sense." And so the dance began. Rostova asked simple, open-ended questions. About the debate tournament. About what time he was there. Who he saw. Julian answered smoothly, effortlessly. He had his timeline down to the minute. He mentioned the bathroom break, the need for fresh air. He made a point of looking Rostova directly in the eye. He was taught that shows honesty. "And did you see Maya that day? At school, perhaps?" "I think I saw her in the hall between classes," Julian said, frowning as if trying to recall a minor detail. "She had her art bag. She was probably heading to her club." He was carefully placing himself in her orbit, but just barely. A casual acquaintance. Rostova nodded, making a small note in her pad. The scratch of the pen was loud in the quiet room. "You took a drive during your break from the debate. Can you tell me about that?" This was the first test. The first little fence. Julian had prepared for this. He let a slightly embarrassed smile touch his lips. "Yeah, I needed to clear my head. The final round was a big one. I just drove around for a few minutes. Listened to some music. I didn't even get out of the car. It was a good lie. Vague, but plausible. A teenager driving aimlessly? Who would question it?" Rostova looked up from her pad. Her tired eyes held his. "Which route did you take?" A flicker, so fast you'd have to be looking for it, crossed Julian's face. He hadn't prepared a specific route. Why would he? No one was supposed to ask. "Oh, you know," he gestured vaguely. "Just around. Through the neighborhoods behind the school. I wasn't really paying attention to the streets." Rostova just nodded again. She didn't push. But she'd felt it. The first tiny ripple in his perfect calm. He had an answer for everything, but this one was just a little too soft, a little too blurry at the edges. The interview wound down. Julian remained the picture of a helpful, grieving friend. As Rostova stood to leave, she paused. "One last thing. What was your impression of Maya?" Julian didn't hesitate. He gave the performance of his life. She was different. In a good way. Really creative. Free. It's such a loss. He sounded so genuine. So heartfelt. But as Detective Rostova walked back to her unmarked car, one thought was crystal clear in her mind. That was the most rehearsed answer of them all. He described her like a eulogy, not a person. He was smart. He was calm. He was almost perfect. And in her line of work, almost perfect is the most suspicious thing in the world. The hunt, for her, had just truly begun. And Julian, sitting back on his white sofa, was certain he had just won the first round. We've seen Julian as the son, the student, the killer. But to understand his collapse, you need to meet the one person who saw him as none of those things. You need to meet Chloe. Imagine a splash of bright yellow paint on a gray canvas. That was Chloe in the Thorne household. Where everything was cool and controlled, she was all warmth and noise. She was 9 years old, a tangle of messy braids and scraped knees, a collection of colorful band-aids always decorating her elbows. Her room wasn't a showpiece. It was a lived-in explosion of stuffed animals, half-finished art projects, and a magnificent, elaborate dollhouse that took up one whole corner. She adored her brother with the pure, uncomplicated devotion only a child can muster. To her, Julian wasn't a sociopath or a genius. He was the boy who could make the swing go higher than anyone else. He was the one who, on rare evenings, would let her sit at the foot of his bed while he read, her presence a quiet, tolerated warmth. And this was Julian's flaw. Not a love for her, not in the way we understand it. It was a sense of absolute, unshakable ownership. Chloe was his. His quiet, loyal, unthinking subject. She existed in his orbit, and he never for a second considered that her orbit had its own gravity, its own power. The night after Detective Rostova's visit, Julian was in his room, methodically wiping down his car's interior for the second time. Chloe stood in his doorway, clutching a one-eyed teddy bear. "Julian," her small voice pierced his concentration. The police lady was nice. He didn't look up from his task. "She's just doing her job, Chloe." She asked about Maya. Chloe's lower lip trembled. "Is she really not coming back?" A flicker of irritation. He hated mess, and emotion was the messiest thing of all. "No," he said, his voice flat and final. "She's not." He expected tears. Instead, Chloe took a step into the room, her eyes wide. "Did she get lost in the woods?" "I get scared in the woods when it's dark." Julian finally stopped what he was doing. He looked at her, this simple, emotional creature. He saw her not as a person, but as a variable that needed to be stabilized. "You don't need to be scared," he said, his tone softening into a practiced, brotherly calm. "It was just an accident. A secret, okay? Don't bother Mom and Dad with it." He turned back to his cleaning. The conversation was over. He had managed her. He had soothed the variable. He had no idea that in trying to quiet her, he had just handed her the key. He called it a secret. And for a little girl who tells all her secrets to the tiny, watchful doll in her dollhouse, that was the most important word in the world. The flaw wasn't that he had a sister. The flaw was that he never saw her as a threat. For a week, nothing happened. The investigation was a ghost moving through Crestmere. You could feel it, a presence that shifted the air, made people look over their shoulders, but you couldn't see it. The news vans packed up and left. The community Facebook group slowly returned to posts about lost cats and garage sales. The world, it seemed, was moving on. But Detective Rostova wasn't. She was like a gardener who knows there's a single poisonous root buried deep, and she wouldn't stop until she pulled it. She went over every statement, every timeline. And her mind kept circling back to one thing, Julian Thorne's drive. It was too clean. Too pat. "I just drove around." Who does that, for exactly 15 minutes, in the middle of a crucial debate? A teenager under that much pressure would be pacing, practicing his lines, not going for a leisurely scenic drive. So, she did what good detectives do. She got in her own car and she drove. She started from the high school parking lot and she timed it. She drove through the neighborhoods behind the school, just as Julian had described. She noted the quiet cul-de-sacs, the perfectly manicured roundabouts. And then, on a whim, she took the one turn he'd never mentioned, the one that led out of the neighborhood, toward the old county road that skirted the edge of the woods. It took her 4 minutes to reach the pull-off where Julian had parked that night. She sat in her car, engine off, and looked at that shadowy patch of gravel. It was the perfect spot. Hidden, but accessible. And it was exactly 11 minutes from the school. A 22-minute round trip, with a few minutes to spare. It fit his timeline perfectly. The next day, she brought Julian back in. Not to the intimidating interrogation room, but to a soft, neutral conference room. She offered him a soda. She was all smiles. She was just, she said, tying up loose ends. Julian, about that drive, she said, leaning back casually. I was just checking the maps, trying to see if maybe you drove past any traffic cameras that might have seen another car, something that could help us. You said you drove through the neighborhoods behind the school, right? Julian, confident and relaxed, nodded. Yeah, just around there. Rostova tilted her head, a friendly, curious gesture. That's interesting. See, if you'd driven straight through those neighborhoods, you'd have ended up on County Road 5. It's a beautiful drive, actually. Lots of trees. Did you go that way? It was a trap, laid with a gentle hand. If he said yes, he'd be placing himself inches from the crime scene. If he said no, he was contradicting his own vague story. Julian's eyes flickered, just for a microsecond. He hadn't prepared for this level of geographic detail. No, he said, a little too quickly. No, I just looped around. I never made it to the county road. Rostova smiled, nodding as if it made perfect sense. Ah, got it. Just looping. Thanks for clarifying. But in that moment, she knew. He had just drawn a box around himself. He had explicitly denied being near the woods. He'd committed to a story. And now, she had something to break. As Julian left the station, he felt a prickle of unease for the first time. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the irritation of a chess player who's just realized his opponent isn't making random moves. She was testing the edges of his board. And for the first time, he wondered if the board was as solid as he thought. The first hairline crack had appeared, and Detective Rostova had her finger right on it. While Julian was carefully guarding the physical world, building his walls of alibis and denials, the investigation was quietly moving into a realm he couldn't control. The digital world. And let me tell you, the digital world never forgets. It's a ghost that holds onto every secret, every keystroke, every deleted thought. Detective Rostova's team started the painstaking process of diving into Maya Peters' digital life. They imaged her laptop, her phone from her bedroom. They went through her social media, her photos, her search history. Most of it was what you'd expect from a 16-year-old artist. Photos of clouds, sketches of her friends, music playlists, searches for art scholarships. But then, they found the ghost. It was in a messaging app, a thread with her best friend, Lena. Most of it was typical, rapid-fire teenage conversation. But one message, sent the afternoon she died, had been deleted. Deleted by Maya herself, moments after sending it. A panicked afterthought. But the app servers, in some cold data center far away, still held onto it. A digital corpse. The tech analyst brought the printout to Rostova's desk. It was a single line of text. Rostova read it, and the air in the room went cold. It was from Maya to Lena. It read, "Just had the weirdest conversation with Julian Thorne. He was asking about my walk home. He was so intense. It's probably nothing, but I think Julian Thorne is a beautiful mask hiding nothing." Let that sentence sit with you for a second. A beautiful mask hiding nothing. It's a chillingly perceptive thing for a teenager to say. She saw him. Not the golden boy, not the prodigy. She saw the hollowed-out thing behind the performance. She'd looked right through the beautiful mask and seen the void staring back at her. And she'd told someone. She'd created a record. This wasn't hard evidence. It wasn't a murder weapon. But for Rostova, it was something more powerful, a motive. It wasn't about hatred or passion. For a boy like Julian, it would be about correction. About eliminating a flaw in his perfect world. She had seen the crack in his facade, and he couldn't allow that to stand. Her perception was a threat. And Julian Thorne eliminated threats. Rostova now had her North Star. Every other lead, every other suspect, began to pale in comparison. This single, recovered message shifted the entire gravity of the case, pulling everything toward Julian. She brought Lena in for another interview. The girl was fragile, her eyes red-rimmed. "The deleted message, Lena," Rostova said gently. "Why do you think she deleted it?" Lena wiped her nose with a tissue. "She texted me right after. She said, 'Forget I said that. It was stupid. He's just intense.'" Lena looked down at her hands. "I think she felt silly. He was Julian Thorne, you know? Everyone thought he was perfect. She probably thought she was overreacting. But she wasn't overreacting. She was the canary in the coal mine, and she'd sung one perfect warning note before she was silenced." Rostova didn't confront Julian with this. Not yet. Why would she? He'd just have another smooth, condescending answer. "She must have misunderstood my concern." No, this was a piece for later. This was the key she would hold on to, waiting for the right lock to appear. For Julian, life went on, blissfully unaware. He still walked the halls of Crestmere High, still received admiring glances. But the landscape had changed. Lena and her friends now looked at him not with admiration, but with a cold, quiet fear. The ghost of Maya's message was already whispering, moving through the student body like a virus. He felt the shift. The stares were different. The silence that fell when he entered a room was heavier. He'd built his beautiful mask with such care, and now, from beyond the grave, Maya Peters was pointing a finger at it, telling everyone it was empty. The investigation was no longer just about a missing girl. It was now a duel between two kinds of intelligence. Julian's, which was cold, calculating, and arrogant, and Rostova's, which was patient, perceptive, and relentless. And the digital ghost had just handed Rostova the blueprint to his soul. So what do you do when the evidence is all circumstantial, and the suspect is a fortress of calm intelligence? You stop looking for what he did, and you start looking at who he is. You call in someone who can map the labyrinth of a twisted mind. Detective Rostova sat across from Dr. Eris, a forensic psychologist, in her office. The file on Julian Thorne was open between them, a collection of facts that felt like pieces from two different puzzles. "Talk to me," Rostova said. "Help me see him." Dr. Eris, a man with a calm, unhurried voice, steepled his fingers. "You're not looking for a hot-blooded killer, Eva. You're looking for a cold-blooded problem solver. This boy," he tapped the file, "he doesn't experience the world emotionally. He experiences it transactionally. People are not people to him. They are tools, or obstacles. Or in this case, practice." Practice. Rostova felt a chill. For a developing narcissist of his intelligence, the ultimate test of superiority isn't getting an A. It's committing the ultimate transgression and facing no consequences. It's the God complex in its purest form. He picked Maya Peters not out of rage, but because she was aesthetically interesting. A complex problem. Her vibrancy, her spirit, that made her the perfect subject. Erasing something so alive would be the ultimate proof of his power. He went on, painting a picture that was terrifying in its clarity. He explained that Julian wouldn't feel guilt. He'd feel pride. Every time he was interviewed, every time he outsmarted a question, it wouldn't be stressful. It would be validating. It was a game, and he was winning. "His greatest strength is also his fatal flaw," Dr. Eris continued. "His arrogance. He believes he's smarter than everyone. That means he'll eventually underestimate someone. He's constructed a perfect narrative in his head, and he can't imagine a plot twist he didn't write himself." Rostova thought of Julian's smug calm, his patronizing smiles. It all clicked into place. The drive, The alibi, the performance, it wasn't just a cover-up. It was a masterpiece he was proud of. "So how do we break him?" she asked. "He doesn't care about the victim. He doesn't fear prison. What lever do we pull?" Dr. Eris leaned forward. "You don't attack his story head-on. He's prepared for that. You attack his control. You find the one variable in his perfect equation that he didn't account for. The one thing he can't predict, can't manipulate. Everyone, even a narcissistic god, has a blind spot. Find what he truly owns, what he truly believes is his, and show him that he never controlled it at all." Rostova left that meeting with a new roadmap. She wasn't just building a case anymore. She was preparing a psychological trap. The goal wasn't to find a murder weapon. The goal was to find the one thing Julian Thorne cared about. And as she drove back through Crestmere, her eyes drifted toward the Thorne house. She thought of the little sister, the one with the messy braids and the adoring eyes. The one he spoke to with casual possession. His sister. The variable he didn't account for. The hunt was no longer about catching a killer. It was about understanding a predator so completely that you could anticipate his every move, and then gently, quietly, place the one snare he would never see coming. The snare named Chloe. Now, let's take a step back from the intensity. Let's go upstairs, to Chloe's room. It's a sanctuary from the cold perfection of the rest of the house. The air smells like crayons and strawberry shampoo. Socks don't match here. Stuffed animals have names and complex backstories. And in the corner, standing as tall as Chloe herself, is the dollhouse. It wasn't a toy. It was a monument. A birthday gift from her parents, a stunning miniature replica of a Victorian home, all tiny spires and detailed gingerbread trim. But this was a Crestmere dollhouse, which meant it was state-of-the-art. It had working little lights that flicked on with a touch. It had a doorbell that really chimed. And because Mrs. Thorne was obsessed with security, even for her daughter's toys, it came with a fully functional, wireless baby monitor camera. A tiny, wide-eyed lens discreetly built into the peak of the dollhouse's roof, giving a perfect, sweeping view of the entire second floor, the master bedroom, the nursery, and the hallway. Chloe didn't see it as a surveillance device. To her, it was just part of the house. She'd furnished it with a meticulous, childlike logic. The mother doll was always in the kitchen. The father doll was in the study. The big brother doll, she always kept him in his room, next to her own little doll. Together. She would spend hours in front of it, whispering conversations, acting out scenes of a perfect, happy family. A family that talked to each other. A family that wasn't so quiet. She was there the day after Detective Rostova's meeting with Dr. Eris. She was moving the big brother doll from his room into the hallway, her small face furrowed in concentration. "Where are you going?" she whispered to the doll, her voice the only sound in the room. She didn't know, of course. She couldn't possibly understand that the little camera in the roof was always on. Always listening. Always watching. That every one of her whispered plays, every secret she told her doll family, was being silently, dutifully recorded onto a cloud server in an anonymous building hundreds of miles away. It was just a toy to her. A place to put her feelings when the real world felt too big and too complicated. When her real brother was downstairs, his face looking like a closed door. When her parents spoke in hushed, worried tones about lawyers and police. She had no idea that her most private, innocent world was, in fact, a vault. A digital diary. And inside that vault, buried in the rambling, simple logic of a 9-year-old, was the truth. She was the only one who was ever completely, unguardedly herself in front of that camera. She was the only one who didn't know it was there. And that's what made her the most reliable witness in the entire case. The dollhouse wasn't just a toy. It was a silent guardian, holding a secret it was just waiting to tell. Detective Rostova knew she had to talk to Chloe. But you can't just interrogate a 9-year-old. So, she brought in a specialist. A woman named Sarah with a soft voice and a bag full of colorful markers and dolls. They sat in the Thornes' living room, with Mrs. Thorne watching nervously from the hallway. Sarah didn't ask about murders or alibis. She just let Chloe draw and play. "Chloe," Sarah said gently, Sometimes when grown-ups are worried, kids notice things. Did you notice anything different about your brother lately? Chloe, carefully coloring a sun with a bright yellow crayon, didn't look up. He's been busy. I see. Do you remember the night Maya didn't come home? The night of Julian's big debate. Chloe's hand slowed. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the drawing. What was Julian like that night? Sarah asked. Chloe put down the crayon. She picked up a doll, holding it tightly. He was sad. The word hung in the air. It was the last word anyone would use to describe Julian that night. Focused, yes. Triumphant, absolutely. But sad? Mrs. Thorne let out a small, relieved sigh from the doorway. She heard the rambling of a child who didn't understand. Why do you think he was sad, sweetie? Sarah pressed, ever so gently. Chloe's voice dropped to a whisper, a secret for the doll. He came into my room. After. His shoes were dirty. He had mud on them. He told me not to tell anyone he was home. He said it was a secret. She looked up, her eyes wide and earnest. But secrets are for hide and seek, not for being sad. It was all there. The dirty shoes. The secret. The timeline. It was a perfect, innocent, devastating testimony. And it was completely dismissed. When the interview was over, Mrs. Thorne apologized. She has such an imagination. She adores Julian. She probably overheard us talking about the investigation and woven it into one of her little stories. Even Rostova, despite her gut feeling, had to concede it wasn't proof. A child's statement, especially one so vague, wouldn't hold up. Sad wasn't a crime. Dirty shoes weren't a murder weapon. Chloe was written off as an unreliable witness, a little girl trying to make sense of the scary things happening in her world. But here's the thing about unreliable witnesses. Sometimes, they aren't unreliable at all. They're just speaking a language that adults have forgotten how to hear. Chloe wasn't lying. She was telling the absolute truth, filtered through the only words she had. She saw her brother's intensity, his quiet, focused agitation, and her 9-year-old mind labeled it sad. She saw the physical evidence, the mud, and connected it to a secret. They patted her on the head and sent her back to her dollhouse, convinced her testimony was worthless. They had no idea that the most reliable version of events wasn't in her interview. It was still in her room, recorded in high definition, waiting for someone to finally listen. Pressure. It's a funny thing. It turns solid things brittle. It finds the weakest point in any structure, no matter how well built. And for weeks, Julian's structure had been flawless. But now, the pressure was starting to build. It was the little things. The way Detective Rostova would sometimes just be there, sitting in her car across the street from the school, not doing anything, just watching. The way his so-called friends had started to give him a little more space in the hallways, their conversations dying when he approached. It was the ghost of Maya's message, haunting the halls of Crestmere High. He could feel the eyes on him. Everywhere. The entire town had become a silent accuser. He'd walk into a coffee shop and the barista, who usually had a bright, familiar smile for him, would just nod quietly, her eyes avoiding his. It was 1,000 tiny pinpricks, none fatal on their own, but together they were draining him. He started to double-check his own movements. He'd lock his bedroom door, even when he was just doing homework. He'd look over his shoulder walking from his car to the house. The world, his kingdom, had become a field of potential threats. The confidence that had once felt like a suit of armor was now starting to feel like a cage. And in the center of all this pressure, there was one place that was supposed to be safe. One person who was supposed to be unquestionably his. Chloe. She was a constant, gentle pressure all her own. Her big, worried eyes followed him around the house. She'd try to comfort him in her childish way, offering him a drawing or her favorite stuffed animal. "Julian, are you still sad?" she'd ask, her voice small. The word grated on him. It was so weak, so pathetic. It wasn't what he was. He was powerful. He was in control. But her insistence on this narrative, this idea that he was somehow the victim here, felt like a distortion of his reality. She was ruining the story he had written for himself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. He was in his room, trying to study, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But his mind was a storm of Rostova's face, of whispered rumors, of the crushing weight of being watched. He needed silence. He needed to be alone inside his own head. And then, the doorknob to his bedroom turned. The lock clicked. He'd forgotten to lock it. The door pushed open and Chloe stood there, holding a plate with 2 clumsily made peanut butter sandwiches. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, a hopeful smile on her face. It was the final straw. The intrusion. The messy, emotional, uncontrolled gesture. It was everything he was trying to wall out. He didn't shout. His voice came out low, cold, and sharp as a razor. "What are you doing in here?" he hissed. "I told you to never come in without knocking. Get out." Chloe froze, her smile vanishing. Her eyes welled with instant, shocked tears. The plate wobbled in her small hands. I just," she stammered. "I don't care," Julian snapped, standing up. His presence seemed to fill the room, dark and threatening. "Get out. And don't you ever come in here again. You're a nuisance, Chloe. A stupid, little nuisance." The words hung in the air, cruel and final. Chloe's face crumpled. She turned and fled, the plate dropping to the carpet, the sandwiches scattering. Julian slammed the door shut and locked it, his heart hammering. He felt a brief surge of satisfaction. He had re-established control. He had reinforced the boundary. But he was wrong. He hadn't reinforced a thing. He had just committed his first truly human, truly emotional mistake. He had attacked the one person who loved him unconditionally. And in doing so, he had taken a sledgehammer to the one support beam in his life that was actually holding any weight. The pressure had found his flaw. And the crack was about to become a chasm. Have you ever been truly hurt by someone you loved? I mean the kind of hurt that doesn't just make you cry, but makes the whole world go quiet and wrong? That's what happened to Chloe. She ran from Julian's room, the word nuisance ringing in her ears, and she didn't stop until she was safe in her own room, with the door closed against the coldness of the house. She didn't go to her parents. What would she say? Julian said, "I'm stupid." In a family that prized perfection, this felt like her failure. So, she did what she always did when her feelings were too big to handle. She went to the one person who would always listen. She went to her doll, Annabelle, who lived in the beautiful dollhouse. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her back to the door, and pulled Annabelle into her lap. The little camera in the roof of the dollhouse watched, a silent, unblinking eye. "Annabelle," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He's so mad at me." She stroked the doll's porcelain hair. "I just wanted to help. He's been so sad since that night." She snuggled the doll closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "It's the secret from the woods." The air in the room seemed to grow still. "He told me not to tell," she whispered, her words a soft murmur against the doll's head. "But you won't tell, will you, Annabelle? You never tell." And then, with the pure, unedited honesty of a child confessing to her only friend, she laid it all out. The entire story. He wasn't at the big school for all of it. He came home. It was late. I heard his car. I was supposed to be asleep, but I wasn't. He came upstairs and his shoes were all dirty. Really dirty. With mud and little bits of leaves. I saw them. She paused, remembering. He saw me looking. And he got that quiet face. And he said, "Chloe, it's a secret. I wasn't here. You didn't see me. Okay." And he said if I told, he'd be in big trouble. She hugged the doll tight, her final words barely audible, but perfectly clear to the microphone. "He was in the woods that night, Annabelle. He has a secret in the woods. And now he hates me." Then she fell silent, just holding her doll, seeking comfort in its static smile. In that moment, In a little girl's bedroom, the case against Julian Thorne was sealed. Not with a shout, but with a whisper. Not in a courtroom, but in a dollhouse. The unreliable witness had just given her most reliable testimony to the only friend she trusted. She had handed the key to the entire investigation to a piece of plastic and a cloud server. And she had no idea. She was just a little girl, trying to understand why her brother, her son, had suddenly turned to ice and called her a name that shattered her world. The secret was out. It was kept by a porcelain doll and a digital ghost, waiting for the right person to finally listen. Where are you listening to this right now? In your car, maybe, staring out at the rain-slicked streets? Or at home, with the world shut out? Wherever you are, you're now the secret keeper too. You know what Chloe said. You know what the doll heard. And that's a powerful thing to know. So make sure you're subscribed. Because this secret is about to be heard by everyone. Detective Rostova sat at her desk, the case file feeling heavier every day. She had the digital ghost of Maya's message. She had the crack in Julian's alibi. She had the psychologist's profile. But it was all a house of cards without something solid, something a jury could touch. She kept thinking about Chloe. The little girl's words. He was sad. His shoes were dirty. It was a secret. A good detective is part scientist, part poet. They have to hear the music in the spaces between the words. And the music Rostova was hearing now was a quiet, consistent tune coming from that little girl. She wasn't a liar. She was a translator, converting her brother's monstrous actions into a language a child could understand. And then she remembered the dollhouse. It was just a fleeting image from her one visit to the Thorne home. A magnificent, elaborate thing in the corner of Chloe's room. And Mrs. Thorne, with her obsession for security and the latest gadgets, had mentioned it. It even has a working baby monitor, so I can hear her playing. A working baby monitor. In today's world, that doesn't mean a simple walkie-talkie. It means a camera. It means a microphone. It means data. It means a cloud server. Her heart started to beat a little faster. This was it. This was the variable Dr. Eris had talked about. The one thing Julian couldn't control. He was smart enough to wipe his phone, to plan his routes, to manage every adult in his life. But he would never ever think to check his little sister's doll for a wire. She spent the next 2 days building the warrant. It was a delicate thing. She had to convince a judge that a child's toy was a crucial witness. She cited Chloe's interview, the inconsistencies in Julian's story, the recovered digital message. She argued that Chloe, in the privacy of her own room, speaking to what she believed was a confidant, was likely to have revealed material facts about the case. She wasn't asking to bug the house. She was asking for data that was already recorded, sitting on a server owned by a toy company. The judge, a serious man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, read the affidavit slowly. Rostova held her breath. This was the gamble. If he said no, the entire case might simply evaporate. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He signed the warrant. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was the tense, coiled energy of a sprinter in the blocks. They served the warrant immediately on the toy company's legal department. And then, the hardest part began. The waiting. Tech companies move at their own speed, buried under a mountain of similar requests. It could take days, weeks. They had the legal right to the data, but no power to hurry it along. Every day that passed felt like a victory for Julian. Rostova would see him around town, his smirk a little more pronounced, his posture a little more relaxed. He could feel the investigation stalling. He was starting to believe, again, that he had won. But in a sterile server farm in another state, a technician was processing a request. A digital copy of a little girl's most private conversations was being prepared, zipped into a file, and sent into the void. Heading straight for Detective Rostova's inbox. The clock was ticking down on Julian Thorne's freedom, and he was the only one who didn't hear it. The data arrived on a Tuesday morning. A simple email with a large attachment. Detective Rostova and her team gathered around a computer, the air thick with a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the hard drive. They clicked play, and there it was. Chloe's voice, small and clear, filling the sterile office. He was in the woods that night, Annabelle. He has a secret in the woods. It was all there. The mud, the secret, the timeline. The final, undeniable piece. There was no celebration. Only a grim, cold resolution. The warrant for Julian Thorne's arrest was signed within the hour. They didn't come for him in the dead of night. They came for him in the bright, unforgiving light of a school day. They believed in the theater of it. They wanted his peers to see. They wanted his kingdom to watch its prince fall. Rostova and 2 uniformed officers met him as he was walking out of his advanced calculus class. His backpack slung over one shoulder, a smirk already forming as he saw her. He thought it was another conversation. Another game he was about to win. "Julian Thorne," Rostova said, her voice loud, carrying down the tiled hallway. Students froze. Locker doors stopped slamming. The world narrowed to this one corridor. Julian's smirk didn't fade. It widened. "Detective. To what do I owe the pleasure? We have a new witness, Julian. Your sister's doll." The smirk vanished. It was wiped clean, replaced by a blank, terrifying confusion. The doll? His mind, so sharp, so prepared for every logical contingency, short-circuited. A doll? It was absurd. It was impossible. "You have the right to remain silent," Rostova began, her voice steady as she recited the Miranda rights. The words, so familiar from movies, now wrapped around him in real life, cold and heavy as chains. As the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, a sound as final as the judge's gavel, something in Julian broke. But it wasn't fear. Not yet. It was a pure, incandescent rage. Not at Rostova, but at the sheer, illogical injustice of it. He was being undone by a toy. It was an insult to his intellect. He didn't struggle. He let them lead him away, past the gaping faces of his classmates, past his debate coach who stood with a hand over her mouth. But as he was guided into the back of the patrol car, he looked out the window, his eyes finding Rostova's. And he laughed. That same, crisp, condescending laugh from the flash-forward. Because in his mind, this was just another move in the game. A dramatic one, sure. But he was still the smartest one here. He still had his alibi. He still had his parents' money and lawyers. A dollhouse? A child's testimony? It was pathetic. It was nothing. He was certain, absolutely certain, he would be home for dinner. But as the car pulled away from the curb, taking him to a place of concrete and steel, the echo of his laugh was the only thing he had left. And outside, the world kept turning, now knowing the name Julian Thorne not as a prince, but as a prisoner. The courtroom is a stage. And for Julian Thorne, the trial was his greatest performance. He didn't see the judge as an authority, or the jury as his peers. He saw them as an audience. And he was the star. He'd sit at the defense table, posture perfect, wearing a suit chosen for its subtle, trustworthy blue. He'd listen to the prosecution outline its case, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile would play on his lips. It was the smile of a chess master watching his opponent march their pawns into a preordained trap. His lawyers were the best money could buy, sharp, expensive, and utterly convinced of his innocence. They painted a picture of a tragic misunderstanding. A bright, promising boy, targeted by a desperate police force with no other leads. They spoke of his debate championship, his charity work, his future. They made the jury see the mask, and they made it shine. And Julian. He was the director of his own defense. He'd pass notes to his lawyers, subtle nods, small shakes of his head. He was always 3 moves ahead. When a witness faltered, he'd look at the jury with an expression of polite pity, as if to say, "See, this is the flimsy story they've built to ruin my life." He loved the ritual of it all. The sound of the gavel. The weight of all those eyes on him. The reporters scribbling in the back. This was the ultimate debate, and the prize was his very existence. He'd glance over at the prosecution's table. Detective Rostova sat there every day, her expression unreadable. She wasn't playing to the audience. She was just waiting. It irritated him, her quiet patience. Why wasn't she more dramatic? More desperate? Her calm was a faint, discordant note in the symphony of his performance. But he was sure he was winning. He could feel it. The jury, a collection of ordinary people from outside Crestmere, seemed swayed by the Thorne family portrait of perfection. His mother, the elegant, grieving figure in the front row. His father, the stoic pillar of the community. They were all playing their parts perfectly in his play. There were moments of tension, of course. When the prosecution played Maya's deleted message, a beautiful mask hiding nothing, the air in the room changed. You could feel the jury lean in. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Julian's eyes went flat and cold. But his lawyer was ready. He stood and, with theatrical flourish, dismissed it. The sad, fictional musings of a creative girl, he called it. A tragedy, but not evidence. And the jury, they seemed to buy it. The moment passed. The mask was back on. During breaks, Julian would walk the halls with a confident stride, his lawyers flanking him. He'd meet his parents' eyes and give them a small, reassuring nod. I have this under control. He was so deep inside the story he had written for himself that he failed to see the other narrative quietly taking shape. He didn't notice how often Detective Rostova's eyes drifted not to him, but to his little sister Chloe, who sat fidgeting in the front row, clutching a small, worn stuffed animal. He was the star, yes. But this wasn't his play anymore. He was so busy delivering his lines, he didn't realize the stage was being dismantled around him, board by board. The final act was coming, and he hadn't even read the script. He was still laughing, certain of his curtain call, while the real drama was preparing to unfold in a whisper, from the one witness he never thought would truly speak. You know that feeling when a house of cards starts to wobble? It doesn't collapse with a roar. It's a slow, sickening tilt, where every breath feels like it might be the one that brings it all down. That was the prosecution's case. One by one, Julian's brilliant, expensive lawyers took their scalpels to it. They were methodical, elegant, even. And they made the state's entire argument look like it was built on smoke. First, they went after the digital ghost. Maya's message. A beautiful mask hiding nothing. In the quiet of the investigation, it had felt so profound. But in the bright, harsh light of the courtroom, Julian's lawyer held it up and made it seem small, juvenile. Is it not true, he asked the jury, his voice dripping with reason, that teenagers, particularly artistic ones, are prone to dramatic flourishes? To seeing mystery where there is none. He turned the message from a chilling premonition into a line of bad poetry. The jury listened, their faces neutral. Then, they dismantled the timeline. The 15-minute drive. The dirty shoes. Julian's lawyer presented a map, his pointer tap-tap-tapping on the screen. He drove to clear his head. He drove through these very neighborhoods. Is it a crime to get mud on your shoes? To take a quiet moment before the most important academic event of your year? He made Rostova's meticulous detective work seem like a paranoid fantasy, a desperate attempt to connect innocent dots into a guilty picture. The worst of it was Chloe. Not the recording. The prosecution was holding that back, a last, desperate card, but her initial statement to the child specialist. The one where she said Julian was sad. Julian's lawyer called a child psychologist of his own. A stern woman with glasses. She explained, in cold, clinical terms, how unreliable children's testimony can be. How they confabulate. How they weave stories from fear and fragments of adult conversation. She made Chloe's heartfelt words sound like the ramblings of a confused little girl, trying to make sense of a scary situation. And is it not also true, the lawyer pressed, his voice softening with false sympathy, that a child who adores her brother might invent a story to try and protect him? To explain his stress and distraction as sadness? You could see the doubt seeping into the jury box. A frown here. A skeptical tilt of the head there. The house of cards was leaning. By the time the defense rested, the mood in the courtroom had completely shifted. The air, once thick with anticipation, now felt heavy with futility. The reporters weren't scribbling as furiously. Julian's parents sat straighter, their confidence returning. Julian himself looked bored. He stifled a yawn. He scribbled a note to his lawyer and almost smiled. This was even easier than he thought. They had nothing. It was all speculation and the testimony of a child. He looked over at Detective Rostova. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask, but he could see the tension in her jaw. He saw the house of cards trembling, and he knew he was the one who had blown it over. It was the greatest intellectual high of his life. As the judge called for a recess, the sound of the gavel was like a starter's pistol for the whispers. They've got nothing. It's all circumstantial. He's going to walk. The prosecution's case hadn't just been challenged. It had been humiliated. And walking out of that courtroom, with a spring back in his step, Julian Thorne was certain of one thing. The game was over. And he had won. The next day, the prosecution called its final witness. And when the door to the courtroom opened, a hush fell, so deep you could hear the rustle of Chloe's best dress as she walked in. She was a tiny figure in a vast, terrifying space, clutching the one-eyed teddy bear for courage. This was the gamble. The one the prosecution had held back. Put the little sister on the stand. Julian watched her, his expression a carefully crafted mix of brotherly concern and mild bewilderment. Inside, he was smug. This was their Hail Mary. The unreliable witness he had already managed so easily at home. He gave his parents a slight, reassuring nod. Don't worry. The prosecutor, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Evans, approached the stand slowly, her voice soft as a whisper. Chloe, thank you for being so brave today, she began. I just want to talk about your brother. Chloe's eyes were huge, fixed on Julian. She nodded, unable to speak. Do you remember the night Maya didn't come home? Another nod. Can you tell us what you remember about your brother that night? Chloe's lower lip trembled. She looked at Julian, seeking a sign, any sign, of the brother she knew. He gave her a small, tight smile. It wasn't warm. It was a command. Be good. Her voice was a tiny, swallowed thing. He was sad. The defense lawyer barely suppressed a sigh of relief. It was the same weak, childish description. But Ms. Evans was patient. Sad? Can you tell me what that looked like? Chloe fidgeted. He was quiet. He came into my room. His shoes were dirty. Julian's smugness solidified. This was nothing. The same dismissed story. And what did he say about his shoes, Chloe? She swallowed hard. He said it was a secret. That I shouldn't tell anyone I saw him. A slight ripple in the jury box. A secret. Then, Ms. Evans did something unexpected. She turned and looked directly at Julian, then back at Chloe. Her voice dropped, becoming even more gentle, more intimate. Chloe, she said, does your brother ever get angry with you? The question seemed to startle everyone. Julian's carefully maintained expression flickered. Chloe's eyes welled with immediate, shiny tears. She nodded, a quick, jerky motion. Can you tell us about that? And the dam broke. In a choked, hiccuping whisper, Chloe described the scene in his bedroom. The slammed door. The dropped sandwiches. The way he'd loomed over her. And then, she repeated the words that had shattered her world, her voice trembling with the memory of the pain. He said I was a nuisance. A stupid, little nuisance. The air was punched from the room. This wasn't a recycled story from a child psychologist's interview. This was new. This was raw, emotional testimony. You could feel the jury recoil. The image of the golden boy was suddenly tarnished by this petty, cruel moment. Julian stared, his mind racing. This wasn't in the script. He hadn't prepared for this. The anger, the name-calling, it was a human error, a moment of lost control, and it was painting him as a monster in front of the one audience that mattered. Ms. Evans let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting the ugliness of it settle over the courtroom. Then, she asked her final question, her voice barely audible. Chloe, why did you decide to tell us this secret today? Chloe looked down at her bear, her tears finally falling onto its worn fur. Her voice was a broken whisper, but the microphone caught every word. "Because he's not sad anymore," she cried. "Now he's just scary." She was led from the stand, sobbing. She had been utterly broken. But in her breaking, she had done something the prosecution's entire case had failed to do. She had made Julian Thorne look like a bully. She had made him look human, and a deeply ugly one at that. He sat perfectly still, the heat of 100 eyes upon him. The performance was over. The mask had slipped, and for the first time, the jury had seen a glimpse of the cruel, cold thing lurking beneath. He wasn't a misunderstood genius anymore. He was the boy who called his adoring little sister a stupid nuisance. And in the economy of a trial, sometimes that is worth more than 1,000 timelines. The jury was only out for 6 hours. 6 hours. In a trial that had stretched for weeks, it felt like the blink of an eye. When they filed back in, their faces were unreadable, a line of stone statues. Julian sat at the defense table, his back straight. He had reapplied the mask. The concerned citizen, the wronged young man. But beneath the table, his knuckles were white. He could feel his heart, a hard, frantic drum in his chest. This was the final moment. The checkmate. The judge spoke. "Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." A piece of paper was passed. The world slowed to a crawl. The judge read it. His face betrayed nothing. He passed it to the clerk. The clerk's voice was clear, flat, and utterly devoid of drama. "On the count of murder in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant, Julian Thorne, not guilty." The sound that followed wasn't a silence. It was a vacuum. And then, it was chaos. Julian's mother let out a choked sob, collapsing against her husband. His lawyers clapped him on the back, their faces split with grins of victory and relief. The courtroom erupted in a roar of gasps, shouts, and the frantic scratching of reporters' pens. And Julian laughed. It was that same crisp, condescending chuckle from the very beginning. The sound of absolute, unassailable victory. He turned to his head lawyer, his eyes blazing with triumph. He leaned in, his whisper cutting through the noise, just for them. "I told you it was easy." He stood up, smoothing down his expensive suit. He was free. He had beaten them. The system, the detectives, the entire world. They were all children playing a game he had mastered. He glanced over at the prosecution's table. Detective Rostova was just sitting there, staring at him. He gave her a slow, deliberate smile. The smile of a winner. He was already thinking about the headlines. The comeback. The book deals. He was immortal. He had committed the perfect crime and walked away. He took a step toward the door, toward his life, his kingdom, his future. The gavel banged, a feeble attempt to restore order. And then, the judge's voice, calm and low, cut through his celebration like a shard of ice. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "before you go, we need to discuss the security footage from your sister's doll." The laugh died in Julian's throat. The victory parade froze in its tracks. The world, for the second time in a minute, went completely silent. But this silence was different. This silence was the sound of the ground dissolving beneath his feet. The celebration didn't just stop. It shattered, like a glass hit by a single, precise note. The backclapping, the relieved sighs, his mother's happy tears, it all froze mid-motion. Every head in the courtroom swiveled from Julian, standing in his moment of triumph, back to the judge. Julian didn't move. He couldn't. The word doll echoed in the hollowed-out chamber of his mind. It was nonsense. A ridiculous, impossible word that had no place in this moment of victory. His brain, so sharp, so logical, simply refused to process it. The judge's face was impassive. He looked down at a new file on his bench, one that hadn't been part of the trial. "It seems," the judge continued, his tone dry as dust, "that during the recess, the prosecution received and processed a final piece of evidence. Data from a smart nursery monitor, specifically the one contained within a dollhouse belonging to your sister, Chloe. Julian's lawyer found his voice first, a sputter of outrage. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The trial is concluded. The verdict is read. The verdict on this trial is read, the judge corrected, his eyes lifting to Julian's. They were no longer the eyes of a neutral arbiter. They were the eyes of a man who has just seen the truth hiding in plain sight. This new evidence, however, pertains to a separate matter: witness tampering, intimidation of a minor, and potentially soliciting a false alibi. Each charge landed like a physical blow. Witness tampering, intimidation. The secret he told Chloe in her bedroom. It's a secret. You didn't see me. They had the recording. They had it all. The confident, straight-backed posture he'd held through the entire trial finally broke. A single, almost imperceptible slump of the shoulders. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pale, stunned mask. He was no longer a free man celebrating an acquittal. He was a defendant, standing in a brand-new courtroom, for a brand-new crime. The doors to his freedom, which had just swung so gloriously open, were now slamming shut with a finality that echoed in his soul. The gavel cracked down once more. Bail is revoked. The defendant is remanded to custody pending a new hearing. The celebration didn't just stop. It shattered, like a glass hit by a single, precise note. The back-clapping, the relieved sighs, his mother's happy tears, it all froze mid-motion. Every head in the courtroom swiveled from Julian, standing in his moment of triumph, back to the judge. Julian didn't move. He couldn't. The word doll echoed in the hollowed-out chamber of his mind. It was nonsense. A ridiculous, impossible word that had no place in this moment of victory. His brain, so sharp, so logical, simply refused to process it. The judge's face was impassive. He looked down at a new file on his bench, one that hadn't been part of the trial. It seems, the judge continued, his tone dry as dust, that during the recess, the prosecution received and processed a final piece of evidence. Data from a smart nursery monitor, specifically the one contained within a dollhouse belonging to your sister, Chloe. Julian's lawyer found his voice first, a sputter of outrage. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The trial is concluded. The verdict is read. The verdict on this trial is read, the judge corrected, his eyes lifting to Julian's. They were no longer the eyes of a neutral arbiter. They were the eyes of a man who has just seen the truth hiding in plain sight. This new evidence, however, pertains to a separate matter: witness tampering, intimidation of a minor, and potentially soliciting a false alibi. Each charge landed like a physical blow. Witness tampering, intimidation. The secret he told Chloe in her bedroom. It's a secret. You didn't see me. They had the recording. They had it all. The confident, straight-backed posture he'd held through the entire trial finally broke. A single, almost imperceptible slump of the shoulders. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pale, stunned mask. He was no longer a free man celebrating an acquittal. He was a defendant, standing in a brand-new courtroom, for a brand-new crime. The doors to his freedom, which had just swung so gloriously open, were now slamming shut with a finality that echoed in his soul. The gavel cracked down once more. Bail is revoked. The defendant is remanded to custody pending a new hearing. The judge gave a quiet nod, and in the dead silence of that courtroom, a prosecutor stood, pressed a key on a laptop, and unleashed the ghost in the machine. It wasn't a video. It was just audio. But sometimes, what you can't see is so much worse. The sound was a little tinny, filled with the soft hiss of a sensitive microphone in a quiet room. And then, a voice. A child's voice, so small and familiar it made everyone lean in. "Annabelle," Chloe's voice whispered, thick with tears. "He's so mad at me." You could see Mrs. Thorne in the front row, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew that voice. She'd heard it through that very monitor 100 times. "I just wanted to help. He's been so sad. Since that night. Julian stood rigid, his back to the room, but you could see the muscles in his neck cord with tension. This was his private world. His kingdom. And it was being broadcast to everyone. It's the secret. The secret from the woods. A juror gasped, then covered her mouth. He told me not to tell. But you won't tell, will you, Annabelle? You never tell. The prosecutor let the recording run, the entire damning confession. Chloe's innocent, rambling testimony, uncoached and pure. He wasn't at the big school for all of it. He came home. It was late. I heard his car. He came upstairs and his shoes were all dirty. Really dirty. With mud and little bits of leaves. I saw them. Detective Rostova closed her eyes. This was the moment. The crack in the universe. He saw me looking. And he got that quiet face. And he said, Chloe, it's a secret. I wasn't here. You didn't see me. Okay. And he said if I told, he'd be in big trouble. The words hung in the air, each one a nail in Julian's coffin. This wasn't a police interrogation. This wasn't a coerced statement. This was a little girl's heart, broken and confiding in her only friend. The recording wasn't finished. It captured the sound of her quiet sobs, the rustle of her hugging the doll. And then, the final, devastating sentence, the one that sealed his fate. He was in the woods that night, Annabelle. He has a secret in the woods. And now he hates me. The audio ended with a soft, final click. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before. It was the silence of truth, finally, after all the lies and performances, standing naked in the room. And in that silence, Julian Thorne broke. He didn't collapse. He didn't cry. He spun around, his face a twisted mask of pure, undiluted rage. All the calm, the intellect, the superiority, it vaporized, leaving behind the raw, ugly monster he truly was. His eyes weren't on the judge. They weren't on the jury. They were locked on his little sister, who was hiding her face in her mother's side. You, he snarled, the word a venomous dart. His voice was low, guttural, unrecognizable. You stupid little girl. The courtroom erupted in shock. The judge slammed his gavel, shouting for order. But Julian was beyond hearing. He took a step toward the gallery, his finger jabbing in Chloe's direction. You ruined everything. I told you. I told you to keep your mouth shut. You stupid, pathetic. He didn't get to finish. The bailiffs were on him, grabbing his arms, pulling him back. But the damage was done. In 5 seconds, he had shown the entire world the beautiful mask hiding nothing. He had shown them the monster. And as they dragged him, struggling and spitting, from the courtroom, the last thing anyone heard was his voice, screaming not about the murder, not about the trial, but about the one betrayal he could never forgive. You broke your promise. You broke your promise. The promise of a secret. The promise of silence. The promise that his adoring little sister would always be his. The final, arrogant, fatal flaw. He was brought down not by a detective, not by a jury, but by the love of a child he was too blind to see as anything but a possession. And in the end, that was the one thing he could not control. They dragged him out, but the performance was over. The monster wasn't just hinted at anymore, or theorized by a psychologist. It had been there, in that room, screaming at a child. You could feel the collective shudder that went through the crowd. The acquittal, just minutes old, felt like a distant, shameful memory. They took him to a holding cell in the courthouse basement. A concrete box. The door clanged shut with a sound so final it vibrated in his bones. And that's when the collapse truly began. It started not with a roar, but with a slow, dawning horror. The reality of what just happened began to seep through the cracks of his rage. He wasn't going home. He wasn't a celebrity. He was a prisoner. Again. He replayed it in his head. The laugh. The smug whisper to his lawyer. I told you it was easy. And then, the doll. The sound of Chloe's voice, so small, so sure. He has a secret in the woods. His mind, his brilliant, logical mind, which had always been his greatest weapon, turned against him. It started connecting the consequences with dizzying speed. A new trial. Witness tampering. The recording was undeniable. He would be convicted. He would never see the outside world again, not as a free man. The arrogance that had held him up for so long dissolved, and what was left was a terrifying, hollow emptiness. He had built his entire identity on being the smartest person in any room, and he had been outsmarted by a 9-year-old and a toy. He looked down at his hands, the hands he had been so sure would never be cuffed again. They were trembling. He couldn't make them stop. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. His breath started coming in short, sharp gasps. This was panic. True, animal panic. A sensation so foreign to him, he didn't even have a name for it until now. He thought of Chloe's face, not the one from the courtroom, but the one from before. The one that looked at him like he hung the moon. He had thrown that away. He had called her a nuisance. And for what? For a moment of pride? For the thrill of proving he could get away with it? A raw, guttural sound tore from his throat, part sob, part scream of pure frustration. He slammed his fist against the cold concrete wall. The pain was sharp and real, a grounding anchor in the swirling vortex of his terror. He did it again. And again. He was unraveling, right there in that gray box. The genius, the prodigy, the golden boy of Crestmere, was reduced to a frantic animal pounding on a wall. The walls of his mind, so carefully constructed, were crumbling, and all that was left was the rubble of his own making. The guard outside glanced in, unimpressed. He'd seen this before. The final collapse of the arrogant. It always ended the same way. Not with a bang, but with the desperate, quiet whimper of a soul realizing it has traded everything for nothing. Julian slid down the wall, his body curling into a fetal position on the hard bench. The laughter was gone. The smirk was gone. All that remained was the echo of his own voice, screaming those final, unforgivable words at the one person who had ever truly loved him. The outside world was gone. His future was gone. All he had left was the 4 concrete walls of his new kingdom, and the crushing weight of his own collapse. So, this is where our story ends. Not with a verdict, that would come later, a mere formality, but with a new set of walls. The walls of a state penitentiary. They're not like the clean, sharp lines of the Thorn House. These walls are thick, old stone, scarred with the marks of 1,000 lost souls. They smell of industrial cleaner and despair. Julian Thorn, the boy who thought he was a king, now has a number. His kingdom is a 6-by-8-foot cell. The only view is of another wall, and a sliver of sky through barbed wire glass. The silence here is different, too. It's not the heavy, waiting silence of the woods. It's a loud silence, filled with the echoes of slamming steel, distant shouts, and the constant low hum of a system that does not care how brilliant you are. His parents never visited. The image of him screaming at Chloe was the last straw. The perfect family portrait was shattered beyond repair. They moved away from Crestmere, trying to outrun the shame. Chloe, she's in therapy. It'll be a long road. But she's with her mother's sister now, in a house with a big, messy backyard where she's allowed to get dirt on her clothes. The dollhouse was taken away as evidence. She doesn't miss it. And Detective Rostova? She drives by the Peters' old house sometimes. The lawn isn't as perfect anymore. A few dandelions have broken through. She thinks that's a good thing. But Julian remains in his new walls. The arrogance is gone, burned away in the fire of his collapse. What's left is a hollowed-out man, forever 17 in his mind, playing and replaying that single moment in the courtroom. The moment he laughed. The moment he won. The moment he lost everything. He realizes now, too late, the fundamental error in his logic. He thought the perfect crime was about outsmarting the system. But the system is just a machine. The true, unpredictable variable was always the human heart. The one thing he couldn't control, calculate, or possess. He thought his sister was his silent subject. But she was the queen on the board the entire time, and he never saw her move. So, if you take anything from this story, take this: the most dangerous person in the world is not the one who thinks they have nothing to lose. It's the one who believes they have everything to own. And the walls that finally trap them are never the ones made of stone and steel. They are the walls of their own making, built brick by arrogant brick, until the world outside disappears completely, and all that's left is the echo of their own laughter, bouncing back at them from the cold, hard, new walls.